Good morning. Good morning. What a week. Before I get to yesterday's ruling, we got to start figuring out, this is coming at us so fast and furious, we got to figure out how to space out our press conferences. But before I get to yesterday's ruling, I do want to quickly address this morning's ruling, through which the U.S. Supreme Court's right-wing majority has erased a woman's long-held constitutional right to an abortion. And let me be very clear, today the United States Supreme Court clarified in no uncertain terms that they do not value the women in our country or their ability to make their own decision about their bodies. This decision, while in no way surprising, it is, after all, what we were warned it would be, is still no less infuriating and disappointing. Obviously, we will have more to say on this in the coming days as we all go through the court's decision, but let there be no doubt we will ensure that every woman in New Jersey has access to an abortion and to the full range of reproductive services they deserve as a matter of right. While I signed historic legislation in January codifying a woman's right to an abortion into state law, I am prepared to take whatever action I can to secure a woman's full bodily autonomy and expand access to reproductive freedom. And by the way, remember, prior to signing that law, a woman's reproductive freedom in New Jersey was entirely built on case law, and all of that case law was in turn built on Roe v. Wade. That would have been litigated and evaporated had we not signed that into law. Where we can, we will act to protect the rights and privacy of any woman who comes to New Jersey from states in which their rights are now eviscerated, if not entirely erased. I give my gratitude to the legislative leadership who recognized, as we did, the dire threat that this right-wing court posed and who worked with us to enshrine a woman's reproductive freedom in state law. In the darkness of this decision, I look forward to working collaboratively with them to further strengthen access to reproductive care and to protecting a woman's right to her own body. Unlike the United States Supreme Court, New Jersey will always stand on the side of our women. We will never stand between them and their doctors. So on to another outrage from this week. Good morning again. With me to my left is the Acting Attorney General, Matt Plackett, and to my right, State Police Superintendent Colonel Pat Callahan. We have a lot of team members here, but I want to give a particular shout out to Chief Counsel Parimal Garg. Yesterday, again, the right-wing majority, which currently controls the U.S. Supreme Court, ruled that states like New Jersey, who believe that careful regulation of firearms makes for safer communities, God forbid, right? We can no longer control our own destinies. The right-wing majority ruled for the first time in our nation's history that individuals have a general right to carry firearms in public, not just in their homes for self-defense. To be clear, this decision will not make us safer. Allowing ordinary citizens to carry concealed weapons into stores and malls, on mass transit, in daycare centers and hospitals, in polling places, or in bars and restaurants does not make us safer. And it does not make our police, Pat, as I know you agree, safer as they do their jobs. A right to carry a concealed weapon is, in actuality, a recipe for tragedy. Moreover, it is not in line with our longstanding New Jersey values, values which have always supported the Second Amendment through carefully crafted and equally as carefully enforced laws to ensure that guns do not needlessly proliferate in our communities. This decision runs roughshod over those values. The right-wing majority has made its decision. As tragic and misguided as it was, we must live with it. That's how it works in our constitutional system. But that will not stop us from doing everything in our power to protect our communities and our residents consistent with this opinion. As long as I am governor, I will never stop fighting for your right to be safe from gun violence. And I will never stop fighting the despicable gun lobby that puts its own profits above American lives. So So today, in just a few minutes, I'm signing an executive order directing all state departments and agencies to review all statutes, rules, and regulations pertaining to them to determine what steps they can administratively take to prevent gun violence. This includes the potential or the ability to designate certain areas as gun-free, as well as their authority to regulate how firearms are carried, transported, or conveyed. Further, while the Supreme Court may have dispensed with common sense, it did affirm the long-standing rules that have prohibited the carrying of firearms in certain sensitive locations such as schools and government buildings. Because New Jersey has had very strict limits on carrying firearms in public until this opinion, we have very few places where the carrying of firearms is prohibited by law. Going forward, this is no longer tenable. I look forward to working with my legislative partners, to whom we have already, as you can imagine, reached out and had constructive conversations, to put legislation on my desk to expand the number and types of places where firearms cannot be carried. And on that list would be the following: locations where there will be a high density of people, including stadiums and arenas, amusement parks, bars and restaurants where alcohol is served, and public transit, among others. Secondly, locations with inherently vulnerable populations, such as daycare and child care facilities, hospitals and other healthcare centers, and long-term care facilities and nursing homes. And finally, buildings where important governmental or First Amendment protected activities take place, including government buildings and other locations where governmental bodies may meet, polling places, courthouses, police stations, and any places where demonstrations and protests or licensed gatherings may occur. This legislation should also set a default rule that firearms cannot be carried onto private property unless the property owner expressly communicates their permission, whether that's a shopping mall or a supermarket or a private home or a house of worship, whatever it might be, in terms of what that private property looks like. That will protect homeowners and businesses who do not want firearms to proliferate in their homes and stores, while fully respecting everyone's private property rights. Under current law, certain New Jersey residents are categorically disqualified from carrying handguns, including those, not surprisingly, with criminal convictions or subject to certain types of restraining orders. We will also look to see if that list can be strengthened. I am grateful to the legislature's commitment to combating gun violence. Just this week, both the Assembly and the Senate advanced a number of common-sense gun safety measures in my Gun Safety 3.0 package, including requirements for training and limitations on certain dangerous weapons. With yesterday's dreadful ruling, the need for these measures is greater than ever, and I look forward to signing these bills into law as soon as possible. I've said it many times before, but it bears repeating. Anyone trying to sell you the notion that more guns means more safety is selling you a false bill of goods. The Supreme Court's right wing bought that line, but we don't. And we know the majority of New Jerseyans don't. New Jersey has one of the nation's lowest rates of gun violence, not because we allow for unlimited guns on our streets, but because we have taken smart actions to ensure they stay out of the wrong hands and out of places where they don't belong. And we will continue to do so. With that, please help me welcome the Acting Attorney General, a champion on this and so many other matters, Attorney General Matt Plackett.
Thank you, Governor. In the span of 24 hours, a right-wing majority on the United States Supreme Court dealt two sharp blows to our state and to our country. Yesterday in Bruin, the majority overturned New York's 100-year-old public carry law. In a radical and unsupportable decision that will recklessly enable gun violence, in particular in our public spaces. That decision relies on a tortured and selective analysis to undermine our ability to protect our residents through common sense gun laws. And it further jeopardizes our safety, and importantly, and in particular, our safety of our law enforcement officers. All of this while our nation averages 10 mass shootings per week, and our communities, and tragically our communities here in New Jersey, endure a daily drumbeat of gun violence. Gun violence is an epidemic in this country, and the court's decision in this ruling in the wake of the horrific tragedies in Buffalo and Uvalde and the rise of gun violence that we're seeing is frankly remarkable in its callousness. But as we know now, and as the governor's already addressed, that's not all the court did this week. Today in Dobbs, a bare majority handed down a devastating setback for women's rights and for the rule of law in this country by overruling 5 decades of settled precedent in both Roe and Casey that recognize the fundamental right to choose whether to terminate a pregnancy. That decision will inflict harm on millions who will wake up tomorrow without meaningful access to legal abortion care, which will inevitably force these procedures into the shadows where they will both be unregulated and unsafe. These decisions reflect a radical break from precedent. They make Americans less safe today than we were just a couple of days ago. And frankly, they represent the height of hypocrisy. We have a Supreme Court that insists on allowing states to control and regulate reproductive health care decisions that should be between a woman and her doctor, but that refuses to let states and our elected leaders take the same democratic steps necessary to protect our residents from the epidemic and the nationwide crisis of gun violence. But in New Jersey, as the governor said, we're taking a different path, and we're using all available tools to protect our residents, despite these 2 dark days. As the governor said, we'll be sharing more about what we're doing in response to Dobbs in the coming days, and I remain grateful to the governor and the legislature for previously passing and codifying the Freedom of Reproductive Choice Act. But today I'd like to touch on briefly what we're doing in response to yesterday's decision in Bruin. I recognize, and I see so many advocates here, I recognize it's easy to feel defeated in the wake of this decision. The court had an opportunity to uphold laws that were designed to keep us safe, laws that impose sensible permitting requirements on those who carry firearms in public and in densely populated areas, laws that protect us from violence as we go about our daily lives, laws that for centuries have been construed to be entirely consistent with the Second Amendment, and yet instead they've made it easier for those who would like to engage in violence, including politically and racially motivated acts of violence. But New Jersey will not stand down. As the chief law enforcement officer of the state and under the leadership of Governor Murphy and in partnership with Colonel Callahan, we will continue to do everything we can to protect our communities. We'll use every tool at our disposal to defend the strict and common sense firearms laws that we do have. And we'll build on the strong foundation that we've made in recent years to combat gun violence and enforce policies that we know save lives. That's why today I'll issue a directive to all New Jersey law enforcement agencies, reiterating that although the Supreme Court has invalidated the justifiable need requirement as part of our concealed carry permitting process, individuals in New Jersey still cannot carry firearms without a permit, and we will continue to enforce every other aspect of our permitting process. Allow me to repeat that just so I'm clear. You cannot carry a firearm in New Jersey without a permit, period. There is nothing in yesterday's decision that changes that. We'll also continue to utilize the criminal and civil enforcement tools at our disposal to ensure that perpetrators of gun violence are brought to justice. And we're going to hold gun manufacturers and distributors responsible for their unlawful conduct. These systems work. The data reflects the impact that our laws have on public safety. There's a reason why New Jersey has one of the lowest rates of gun violence in the country, as the governor has referenced. And it's because of our tough but common sense and entirely constitutional gun safety laws. We cannot and we will not go backwards, not when it comes to addressing gun violence, not when it comes to protecting our most fundamental rights. I stand behind Governor Murphy's call to expand the number of places where firearms cannot be carried in our state, and I thank him for his leadership and dedication to protecting our residents. I also commend the legislature's commitment to advancing our statewide efforts to prevent gun violence. And I want to thank Colonel Callahan for the state police's integral role in the permitting process, one that will only become more important in the days to come. And of course, thank you to all of our law enforcement officers throughout the state who are doing their hard work every day to keep us safe. I look forward to working together to strengthen our state's response to these two devastating decisions and to keeping our residents safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for everything you do on this and so many other fronts. God knows we have a lot of fronts these days. Please help me welcome, last but certainly not least, another extraordinary leader, the Superintendent of the State Police, Colonel Pat Callahan.
Good morning, everybody. I'll be brief. In the wake of this ruling, the very first thing I did this morning was call in our firearms investigation unit from a preparedness standpoint and from a process standpoint of what this impact is going to have on the state police as the overseers of this process. The Attorney General and I also got on a call with all 21 county prosecutors, and shortly after that got on a call with more than 400 law enforcement executives to discuss this ruling and its impact on New Jersey and our citizens. And I'll just leave you with this, because I think it struck me on my way down here this morning, Governor. My very first day in uniform as a New Jersey state trooper, very first day, I was assigned to Route 78. And two motorists got into a road rage incident, decided to pull over on the shoulder and settle it. One went to his truck and speed loaded a .45 and shot the other motorist and took off. We did subsequently arrest that shooter later that afternoon. But I always thought, what if that motorist who fired that shot didn't have that access to that weapon? It probably would have ended with a few hand gestures and off they would have went. But that wasn't the case. The fact that there was a weapon involved is what changes people's behavior and has them act and do things, willing to take somebody's life over being cut off on Route 78, which happens, as everybody in this room knows, just about every 3 minutes throughout the state. So as a foundation, and what our role as a state police is just to continue to ensure that weapons and firearms don't fall into the hands of people that should not have them, and that's what we're going to continue to do. Thanks, Governor.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. I want to thank the advocates here. If you're watching, you can't see a lot of T-shirts. A lot of moms demand action red T-shirts here. I want to thank them. I want to thank some of our Brady friends, members of clergy, folks who have stood by our side every step of the way. And if this were tomorrow and we were talking about the Roe decision in a separate press conference, we would have had many of you back, and along with a whole other bunch of advocates who have stood by our side. And that has meant so much to us as we've made the progress that we've made. I think I'm going to invite my colleagues over to sign the executive order. We'll come back and take a couple of on-topic questions in a minute. It's an executive order number 299, and I won't get into all the details, but you heard me say earlier to describe it. This is asking all government agencies and departments to immediately assess what steps they can take, especially as it relates to establishing a robust and strong safe places list of places that you can't carry a weapon. So here's the money shot. Cannot see a thing, so I'll put the glasses back on. First pen goes to Acting Attorney General Matt Plackett. Thanks, Matt. And the second pen goes to the Superintendent of State Police, Colonel Pat Callahan. Signed a lot of happy executive orders. When you sign 299, you get a good amount of happy and a good amount of So we'll take a couple of questions. Brenda.
Two questions. The first one, will you ask the legislative leadership to keep the Assembly and Senate session to possibly consider these restrictions that you're talking about? And secondly, the executive order, could you explain what is it that you expect these agencies and departments to do? To forward you
Yep.
suggestions about places where they feel there's vulnerability?
Yep.
And then what would you do with that information?
I'm going to ask Matt to come in more strongly on the second one. On the first one, to be determined, we do not have an adversarial relationship with legislative leadership. To the contrary, the outreach that our teams have already made on this have been extremely constructive. So bear with us on exactly what the time frame looks like, but these are leaders who get it just as we do, and I'm highly confident we'll make progress in a timely manner. By the way, unless Matt corrects me, both of these decisions are effective immediately, so time is, particularly on the gun side, as well as I continue to think on access to abortion rights, time is of the essence. On the latter, yes, it is to come up with that list of places that we believe are safe places that that those departments and agencies in their own authority determine that it is inappropriate to have a weapon in those places. Again, that's not in lieu of legislation, but that's a step we need to take and want to take, and Matt would ask you to come in on that.
Yeah. The governor's order directs all state agencies to review their existing statutory authorities to consider what steps they can take under existing authority to protect certain sensitive spaces. The governor separately proposed a series of legislative recommendations to expand the list of statutory sensitive places where you would prohibit public carry of firearms.
Thank you, Matt. I also want to acknowledge Bill Kastner, who was with us, and I don't know where we would be, Bill, without you, so thank you for that. Brian.
The Supreme Court order seemed to leave a window open to require, for example, allow you to require gun safety training in order to have a weapon. I don't think we have that requirement now. The Colonel may know better. If we don't, how robust of a safety training program presumably would you like to see?
So you're right, number one. Number two, it must be said, and Matt, you'll correct the record, or Pat, if you see this differently, nothing that was decided yesterday impacts any of the pending bills that we have in Gun Safety Package 3.0. And one of those bills is exactly that, to train. Just like you have to go through a process before you get a driver's license, we would ask respectfully folks to go through a similar process before they get a gun permit.
Any progress on that legislation?
Yeah, you saw a fair amount of progress this week in both the Assembly and the Senate, and those bills are moving, which is a really good thing. Joey.
So, given that there might be litigation in the state about legislation on guns, I'm curious whether you see it as at all alarming how many judicial agencies there are, especially on the Supreme Court. And then also, just adding on to the previous question for the Attorney General, how do you see these new gun bills interacting with the Supreme Court decision overall?
Yeah, I'll have a thought on each, but Matt will come in on the second. We clearly share the Chief Justice's concern. I think the legislative leadership, Senate obviously in particular, shares the concern that we need to fill these vacancies up. We've filled a lot of them. We have a bunch in the pipeline. I'm confident we'll have a positive resolution sooner than later on the Supreme Court. I would just say, as a non-lawyer, I don't think this decision impacts any of these bills that are pending, but I want Matt, who is a lawyer, to come in and answer.
Yeah, look, the Supreme Court spoke clearly yesterday with respect to the justifiable need requirement, and while we strongly disagree with their reasoning, we're obligated to follow that. As it relates to gun laws more broadly, the Supreme Court left a lot of gray. And we've been challenged on our gun laws, and we've successfully defended them under the Second Amendment. We believe every gun law that we have and every gun law that the governor and the legislature are considering now are entirely defensible under the Second Amendment, including under the Bruin decision. And I assure you we're going to continue to vigorously defend our laws, including the new tools that we hope to be given in the coming days.
Thank you, Matt. Please.
I have two questions. One, wonder what your thoughts were on requiring liability insurance for gun owners. And the second one is, a lot of folks are saying that there's going to be a surge in people asking for concealed carry permits. So I don't know if you're doing anything different to kind of prepare for that surge, if you're putting out directives or.
Well, I think, and Pat should come in and correct this because the state police does a lot of this themselves. I think the reason why you had over 400 law enforcement folks on the call is to get guidance on that very process. But maybe you could address that, and Matt, could you address liability insurance, if that's okay? Pat?
Yeah, we are definitely anticipating a dramatic influx. Luckily, a few years ago, we started an online application system which helps speed that along and to get away from a paper process. Our firearms investigation unit, in anticipation of this ruling, actually have been working with the vendor to create a whole separate module on the application to carry. So technology and staffing, I think, are the two things that we need to focus on to process these as they come in. I got one early this morning, but it was based on last year's permits to purchase. We think probably upwards of over 200,000 potentially, so we're trying to gear up for that. Correct.
Matt, anything on liability?
The proposal that has been discussed is to have mandatory liability insurance for people who do carry a firearm in public. It's something that has been discussed. I'll defer to the legislative process, but as with automobiles, that's a similar concept.
Please.
Do you anticipate seeing a surge in people from out of state looking for abortions coming to New Jersey? Are there any infrastructure issues, anything that you need to do for that?
Too early to tell, but my guess is yes. We're becoming a patchwork country. Geographically, we are largely in a good neighborhood, so we may not be the first logical place that someone would go just based on geography. But while whether or not we promote it, quote unquote, or not, I want to make it clear to every woman anywhere, certainly first and foremost in New Jersey, but anywhere in this country, that we will stand by you. But too early to tell. Brent.
If you don't get a bill expanding abortion access, could you sign an executive order to do so? We published a story on Sunday on padded quiet rooms where kids are locked inside as they disrupt classes. Would you support banning them? And what's the latest on spending agreements with state budget?
Yeah, I'm not going to address that. I should have said I wanted it on topic only. I will just make a comment on the state budget. Our negotiations continue. Still have a good amount of work to do, but I would characterize it in a good place. I don't know whether or not, I haven't looked at that. I don't want to give up on the legislation on access, Brent, so I don't have a crisp answer for you. Please.
Governor, building on New Jersey's Freedom of Reproductive Rights Act in May, he said to clearly understand the danger that the reversal in Roe could influence regarding surveillance, punishment, and criminalization. Can you expand on that a little bit? And also, would insurance providers have to reside in states in New Jersey for it to be covered here?
So I want to address the first piece, if I may. One of the bills that we've proposed is that it's very explicitly protecting not only the woman, but anyone who has anything to do with the procedure. So that's the Uber driver, obviously the healthcare provider, anybody else. I continue to feel strongly that we need to take steps in that direction, and I hope that can be by statute. I don't. When you can do a bill versus an executive action, you always want to do the bill because it's much more permanent. It's much more, you bring, by definition, a lot more people along with you. And on the insurance, I'm not sure, can we come back to you on the insurance question? Thank you. So I want to just make a couple of closing comments, if I may. And I don't want to speak, I don't speak to, first of all, I want to thank Matt and Pat for your leadership, period, but also for being here today. Amen. And all the advocates and clergy and others who have stood by our side at every step of the way and continue to do that, and our team. But I don't speak to folks who have a fundamentally different view on abortion, such as leadership in my church. I don't agree with them, but I respect their opinion. But again, I don't agree. And by the way, a woman's right to an abortion has been a right that has existed for 50 years. There are, believe it or not, a fair amount of Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment folks out there who don't agree with concealed carry. So my argument is not and never has been with law-abiding Second Amendment folks who period, but also who agree with us on concealed carry. But I do want to speak to the folks who in 2016 voted for president because they wanted to shake things up. And I want to ask you, are you happy? Because you've shaken things up. A woman is now no longer protected, no longer respected. Her rights are no longer respected. On average, the health of women in this country, particularly in underserved communities, overwhelmingly black and brown, that the quality and level of health will inevitably go down. I hope you're happy with that. I hope you're happy that police are now more at risk, their lives, their personal security, that road rage incident leads to, unfortunately, more often than not, each guy's got a gun in their truck or their car. I hope you're happy that you've shaken things up. And to probably a similar group of folks who don't think elections have consequences, do you really still think that now? Do you really believe that now? And while, listen, we have no Senate race in New Jersey this year, and clearly the Supreme Court justices get the processes through the Senate, we've got a lot of other important races. I'll point you to one, the 7th Congressional District, where two good guys, by the way, I know them both well, but one of them explicitly and actively voted against women's reproductive freedom in January. So I'll just pick that election as one. Elections have consequences, and sadly, we are living with the carnage of those consequences the past 2 days. So maybe ending on a grace note, to everybody out there, get off your rear end. Get your hands out from under you. Stand up, get out, scream from the highest mountains, do it peacefully, and vote. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you.